Welcome everyone to the first of our summer term What If debates. Firstly, our usual housekeeping matters. For those of you who like to tweet, hopefully you've seen the posters around the room with the Wi-Fi login instructions, and the hashtag is #IOE Debates, all one word. And those watching via the live stream can submit questions for the panel via that hashtag. Now, we're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm does sound, please take the doors at the back and we'll go out onto Bedford Way. We've put this event series in place to address some key educational debates and to challenge a range of speakers to bring some fresh thinking to them. As well as this debate on AI in the curriculum, this term will be looking at the progress made on special educational needs since the 1978 Warnock Report. We'll be looking at what we can and can't learn from neuroscience in education, and also how we can encourage more young people to enjoy maths. So we hope to see you all at those debates as well. And we're really delighted to be working with the TES for the series. We don't sadly have TES's Ed Dorrell with us tonight, but his colleague Kate Parker is here and tweeting out as usual. So, to tonight's event. We're promised that the fourth industrial revolution will transform how we live and work, and that it's unlikely that any profession or corner of the economy will escape that change. So this is an opportunity to meet our own needs as well as those of wider society more effectively and sustainably. But it's also obviously a threat, especially if we don't get the education we need to adapt and thrive. But what kind of education do we need in the future? Something completely different, or just the addition of a few more classes on coding and machine learning? Can we get by on knowledge alone, or will we need to pay more attention to our creativity, problem solving, and people skills? There seem to be two real questions at the core here for me. One is about the appropriate curriculum, and we've got this very binarized discourse, haven't we, about knowledge on the one side, skills on the other, and some real questions there, both about the evidence underpinning any of those arguments, but also about the extent of the binary and whether that's appropriate. And then we have a question about the extent of change. And the information coming through at the moment does seem to be very woolly. Estimates of the share of automatable employment vary widely, ranging from sort of 14% to 50%. And according to the McKinsey Global Institute, between 9 to 32% of the workforce in developed economies could be displaced within the next decade. Well, that's rather a wide margin, isn't it? You know, do we need more? Do we know more about this? And we need to know more in terms of informing our education policies. So here to help us reflect on these questions, we have key figures from the education and technology sectors. First of all, Professor Rose Luckin. She's Professor of Learner-Centered Design at the UCL Knowledge Lab here at the IOE, and a leading commentator on artificial intelligence and education. She's recently been a key consultant to the House of Lords report that's just out. And Rose is passionate about improving the quality and efficacy of new educational technology. Her latest venture to that end is the Educate project, again hosted here at the IOE. That brings together edtech startups, teachers and researchers so that they can better share their expertise and experience in the development of new platforms and applications. Also a college governor and former teacher, last year Rose was named on the Selden list as one of the 20 most influential people in education. Guy Fernando is an engineer, social impact entrepreneur and investor who's launched several successful technology businesses. Last year, he received an MBE for services to the digital economy, as well as being named as Entrepreneur of the Year at the Asian Achievers Awards. And amidst all this, Guy is also a thought leader on the future of work and the impact of automation on AI on employment and society. Professor Mark Bailey is High Master of St Paul's School. He's previously held other headships and lectured in medieval history at Cambridge, Oxford, and East Anglia. And next year, he'll deliver the James Ford Lectures in British History at the University of Oxford. Mark's also a successful sportsman, having captained the Suffolk County cricket team and won several caps for England in rugby. And finally, Baroness Sally Morgan. Alongside her most recent appointment as chair of the Royal Brompton and Harefield NHS Foundation Trust, Sally's engagement with the education sector continues to be wide-ranging. She's chair of Ambition School Leadership, vice chair of King's College London, advisor to the ARC Board, and trustee of the Education Policy Institute. And she was previously chair of Ofsted. Sally also chaired the House of Lords Select Committee on Digital Skills, so very relevant today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Rose to start us off. Rose.
Hi, thank you, Becky, and it's a great pleasure to be here. So, yes, this lovely report came out last Monday. AI in the UK, ready, willing and able, ? And interestingly, 5 principles that the House of Lords recommend that we need to have on board, and one of them is absolutely spot on for our title of our debate today. So number 4 of the 5 principles is, all citizens have the right to be educated to enable them to flourish mentally, emotionally and economically alongside artificial intelligence. Sounds so straightforward, doesn't it? But actually that's a really big ask, and it plays centrally to this question of, if we really want to prepare young people for the age of artificial intelligence, what do we need to do? So first of all, let's say, what is artificial intelligence? So artificial intelligence is grounded in a history that's cast AI in terms of human intelligence. So from the date of the Turing test to definitions up until this year, we talk about artificial intelligence as being able to do things that require intelligence when done by a human, or would be thought to be intelligent by a human. So we're always comparing AI and human intelligence. And we tend to think of it in terms of the technologies. We talk about machine learning, but machine learning is only one sort of way of implementing artificial intelligence. It just happens to be one that's captured the headlines recently. But if we take away the manifestation of AI and technology, think beyond machine learning, what artificial intelligence is really about is intelligence. And it's an interdisciplinary study of intelligence because it needs to combine cognitive psychology to help us understand human abilities, philosophy to understand what it means to be human, what knowledge is. It needs computer science, mathematics, logic to enable us to build the complex technologies that can implement intelligent action. And it needs linguistics to help to explain the structure and function of languages for communicating and thinking. So it's essentially interdisciplinary and about intelligence. And actually, the evaluation of artificial intelligence in terms of human intelligence has actually ended up thinking in terms of a very narrow sort of human intelligence. And therefore, I think we're at risk of thinking the AI is smarter than it really is, because we've dumbed down our own conceptualization of our own rich human intelligence. But actually, you know, we can be really arrogant. I'm very struck that in the first part of this lovely report from the Select Committee, they call back to the 1956 Dartmouth College collection of 10 scientists. 2 of them were British, 8 of them were not British. Maybe there's something there that we should reflect on. But the statement, we propose that a 2-month, 10-man study of artificial intelligence be carried out. The study is to proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can in principle be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. An attempt will be made to find how to make machines that use language, form abstractions and concepts, solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans, and improve themselves. We think that a significant advance can be made in one or more of these problems if a carefully selected group of scientists work on it together for a summer. The entirety of human intelligence solved over a summer. How could we have believed that? But I went to listen to Demis Hazzabis, Chief Executive and founder of Google DeepMind, last month at the Royal Society. What is the mission of Google DeepMind? Solve intelligence. And then use it to solve everything else. Spot the difference. Well, there is a difference, of course. I have huge respect for Demis and indeed for the scientists who gathered at Dartmouth College. And certainly Demis is not doing it over a summer. He's taking a lot of time and employs hundreds of people. But the point is, we often underestimate the complexity of human intelligence, and then we have problems because the AI doesn't come up to muster. So why are we bothered about it now? Well, we're bothered about it now because we've got a perfect storm. A perfect storm of huge amounts of data, lots of cheap processing power and storage in our computers, and smart algorithms that can learn. And these algorithms can learn much faster and more accurately than we can. They can learn information. They can build immense knowledge bases of very carefully sifted and collated information that they can search with pinpoint accuracy to find out what we want. They can learn the knowledge-based curriculum like that. So we have no choice but to change. Because one of the really interesting pieces of work that's been done recently, 2 years ago in fact, that really changed the debate was, of course, AlphaGo, the machine that beat Lee Sedol, the world champion Go player. Now, I don't know if any of you have looked at the film of that, or film of some of those games, but there's one classic picture of Lee Sedol like this. And that's the moment when he realizes he's going to lose. If we do not rethink the way that we have our relationship to knowledge, and we do not move away from a knowledge-based curriculum to an intelligence-based curriculum, we are dooming everybody globally to that. Because we're pitting people against systems that will win if we focus purely on a knowledge-based curriculum. Therefore, whatever the arguments about knowledge and skills, they're almost irrelevant. They're a red herring. Because the harsh reality is we have built systems that learn very accurately. So we need to use our human intelligence to work out what our response to that should be. And it has to be a response that moves towards the richer nature of our own human intelligence. Take this piece in TES yesterday, Andreas Schleicher, England held back by rote learning warns PISA boss. Rote learning and a narrowing of the curriculum, says the official behind the PISA international education rankings. And later he says it will damage student outcomes and could cost them jobs because jobs will be overtaken by AI. So we have built these very intelligent systems, and now we've got to use our own human intelligence to work out how we deal with that as educators. And as educators, we have to lead the way towards an intelligence-based curriculum that does not doom generation after generation of young people, and indeed older people as well, to a life of that.
Rose, thanks for that provocative start. That's great. And over to you, Guy.
All this talk about intelligence makes me feel a bit, unintelligent, given what my lecturers thought of me at university, which is why I embarked on an entrepreneurial career, because no one would employ me because I was no good at university. So the interesting thing for me is seeing this kind of actually happen in the real world from an investor and employer. So interesting story. There was a very large company which recently went bust. And inside that large company, there was a very small company they'd acquired, which basically provided legal services. The only difference with this legal services firm, which assessed risk in legal contracts, complex contracts, was it had no lawyers in it. So the assessment of the risk in a complex legal contract was done by AI, and the people they hired, who were not lawyers, were youngsters who were savvy, problem-solving, really good manner, who applied the risk assessment to the client at a unit cost less than a law firm, and actually sold to law firms who sold their product through. So the law firm made more money. They made money. The company went bust when they were looking at their business model, didn't see what they had. And the thing that strikes me about this is what happens to those lawyers, you know, the graduate lawyers, and what happens to them doing a law degree when what they're learning is what the basic law is what the AI takes 3 seconds to do, right? This is not the partners who have a kind of business development, solution finding relationship, which apparently takes years and years to develop. But what the irony is, of course, the youngsters being hired by this firm are doing partner work, which is fitting the risk assessment data to a solution, but they're doing it when they're 21. So that's actually making the profession just more human and interesting than kind of knowledge compliance, which is a different thing. Now, sadly, you know, when the company bust, I was trying to buy it for £1 and then sell it to a law firm. But because I was getting involved in it, they raised the price, so that changed. The other interesting thing is, I think we talk about education quite a lot, but you know, I think the education system is one component of a whole system. The education system kind of feeds what I call the recruitment system. The recruitment system feeds the progression system. The progression system feeds the leadership system. The leadership system feeds the influence system. And the influence system feeds the education system. So if you change the education system, you hit up against the recruitment system. And the recruitment system, the recruitment system looks for, as what good looks like, is knowledge compliance and the institutions which look at knowledge compliance. And the trouble with this sort of thing is, of course, the proxy, if an alien came down to Earth to determine what is the factor that most contributes to your future success, and looked at all the data points around it across the globe, it's where you happen to be born, right? And that is really inefficient, especially in an age of AI, right? Because if you've got this spiral, then just fixing the education system is actually a pointless exercise, because you just choose to ignore everything and the progression system and everything else. And the thing is, working with companies, you know, one of the companies I've got, Freeform, as I'm CEO of, we're trying to kind of help big companies with digital transformation with the people left in. So how do we do a different model of kind of training and measurement and assessment to get Betty in that branch of a bank to actually have a better customer relationship by using software and mindset and behaviors as well as skill set to sell more, to earn more, to build a longer term relationships. And even despite sometimes the data we have, you know, we A/B test it, you know, we have our intuition, we have our assessment. One group have our kind of interventions, the other group doesn't. We can show that we have an impact on the bottom line on those people. You still have senior leaders in those organizations who go, yeah, but I don't think Betty can be digital. Yeah, she doesn't have the digital skills. And we keep saying it's not the skills, because the good thing about digital skills and the bad thing about digital skills is they change. They change very quickly, right? Mindset and behaviors, the way you work, the way you have relationship. Our data model is, you know, how do you go about looking after yourself? Metacognition, online health. How do you use information wisely? How do you go approaching problems? How do you go about communicating them with all these channels? And what is your relationship to automation, technology, and AI? Those are the 4 factors dividing into 20 attributes in a vector. We use that to assess it, and that we use to prove the evidence. But even then, there's a systemic problem. Even when you produce fact, that that person can be digitally augmented, senior leaders in big organizations just will not believe you, even with the facts. And that is a big issue we need to solve with governments. And that also harks back to the other issue, which is, what is the data about people? I cannot believe it is possible to put the data about a human being on 2 pages. Right? That is not a normal thing. You know, that works in a world where you can do the same thing for 20 years. When you do a different thing every week, it falls to pieces. The whole supply chain, the whole systems, how they work, the education system feeding the recruitment system, feeding the progression system, feeding the influencer system, feeding the education system, falls to pieces when the thing you do changes very quickly. And that is the world we're in. And AI, what that does, will really start to force the issue. And the fear is, you know, it's almost like, I was talking to Charlie Ledbetter the other day, it's like Luddites plus Facebook, right? You don't need as many Luddites to moan, but Facebook and social media will amplify that massively, and then you'll have a lot of people feeling left behind. And that will result, as we know when that happens, historically, to war. And that's why we have to be very careful about what we do. But it's not just education, it's governments and companies need to take responsibility for the future.
Guy, thank you so much. Mark, let's hear from you.
Well, the experts tell us that the best way to prepare young people for the age of artificial intelligence is to develop non-cognitive skills, empathy, creativity, imagination, the ability to engage in philosophical and ethical issues. As one put it, to thicken social capital and human connections. So if AI is dominating cognitive skills and repetitive high-volume functions in the future, then clearly non-cognitive skills will become the scarcer commodity. And that means that that's what we should be developing in education. I would include in that resilience and mental health, because creative breakthroughs are famously achieved only through multiple failures. And the ability to cope with failures and have an appropriate mindset is clearly a significant part of those non-cognitive skills. What role does education have? Well, in the late 20th century, it's been increasingly focused upon preparing young people for the workplace, but when that workplace is going to be dominated by that type of machines and that type of knowledge and them that have mastery of processes, then the obvious implication is that education should be more shifting towards educating the whole person, going back to that notion of schools and universities as units of socialization. In sort of reforming the centre of where education should be, I don't think we should abandon a content knowledge-based curriculum. We have a broad and balanced curriculum which I think should be reformed and revised but not thrown out. We should not skew the curriculum massively to coding or to related disciplines. Nor should we be having price disincentives to study in particular types of degrees at university. What we need to do, I think, in schools, is to demystify AI. What is it? What can it do? So we're not churning out CFOs who are disbelieving about what it might do, as G says. We certainly need a basic knowledge of coding and coding skills. But for the most part, I think we should be layering the necessary skills on top of a broad and balanced core curriculum. And I spent a day at Rockstar Games in New York, Grand Theft Auto, and said, how many of your 2,000 employees have coding and computer science background? And the answer was less than a fifth. We want creatives. They've all got degrees, but they're in creative subjects. We need artists, and we need product designers to sort of develop the future, which I thought was they want people who can challenge, not just those who can code. Because they said, we can teach people to code beyond a certain level that in ways that are specific to our area and discipline, but we want creative people who can challenge and be imaginative. There's a challenge, though, in increasing non-cognitive skills in education, because that requires us to accelerate our teaching toward that which has been traditionally implicit or non-measurable or non-assessed. Non-cognitive skills in the current curriculum are only overtly assessed at early years, not beyond. So to develop those within the curriculum will be a challenge. There is a shift towards that, presentation skills, group work, collaboration and so on, but it clearly needs to go much further. In schools, we don't undertake competency testing. We don't undertake personality testing. We have no ways of measuring start points of profiles and then developing. HR professionals have great expertise, so there's possibly an area there. It also, I think, requires a change to school evaluation. For as long as inspection regimes are interested in the development of the whole child, but are not really measuring and are failing schools on perhaps different, more objectively measured criteria, then schools will not be incentivised to develop the non-cognitive aspects of the curriculum. Same with league tables. For as long as they're based on narrow examination outcomes, which are fundamentally content and knowledge based, we're not going to send the right signals. Policymakers have got to send the right signals, and examination specifications have got to change to build in more assessment of non-cognitive skills. A great example is the EPQ, which I think is a wonderful qualification, but is not yet commonplace in schools, and it's not required for universities. And there's the next challenge. For so long that universities simply want certain examination outcomes and principally matriculate on that, then there's not an incentive for either schools or pupils to develop non-cognitive skills. The EPQ is not really a matriculation requirement for most universities except in points-based, and there's a good example. It offers a really good way to develop all of those non-cognitive skills, but it's not yet part of the matriculation requirement. And I think also interesting, going to the United States, talking to boys and girls who are at the American university, they say how fantastic the faculty interaction is in the States compared with Britain. That there's a real commitment to developing the whole person outside the classroom. Is there a sense in which UK universities with massive increase in student numbers and less proportionate increase in faculty members are moving away from that sort of social interaction, the unit of socialisation, which was very much a feature of universities when they were set up? Have we lost that, and should that then come back into a university-style education? So the conclusion, non-cognitive skills will be at a premium. Great, that's what I think we possess, so we need to develop them. Empathy is the least replicable of those skills in artificial intelligence, and we need to shift our education to develop it. We need to demystify artificial intelligence as part of our curriculum. We need to introduce basic coding, but otherwise layer on the core curriculum. We need to adapt the core curriculum to explicitly develop non-cognitive skills, and that will require a systemic change. The way that teachers teach, the way they measure non-cognitive, developing extracurricular, co-curricular activities, and then measuring and trying to be explicit about what non-cognitive skills, co-curricular activities are developing. Inspection regime, universities will have to change if they are to appropriately incentivise. Schools are already making progress in this way. There's some good news there, and we should recognise that, but it needs accelerating, and we need to be much more explicit about what the skills are that we need and why we are developing them and how we are measuring them. And there's the irony. Schools and universities might be going back to the future as units of socialisation.
Mark, thank you. And lastly, Sally.
Thank you very much. I'll try and give a bit of a bird's eye view, I suppose, for in the view of policymakers, I guess. I've been on various select committees, in particular in the last few years, where digital and AI have constantly been discussed. In fact, literally, I came this afternoon from one where we were looking at infrastructure and the building industry and the fact that AI will drive change there, but again, the dearth of skills that actually is available for that. During that, we heard ironic sort of extremes, I suppose. Well, what is AI? AI is God, according to Lewandowski, and AI is a bigger threat than North Korea, according to Musk. Now, perhaps North Korea is not looking quite as bad as it did at the moment, but nevertheless, for me, I think AI could be the opportunity to have IKEA cupboards built by a robot. I mean, that gave me great hope when I saw that in the papers. But it's slightly, I think, you take your pick. There are so many reports and so many stats that, in a sense, that doesn't really matter. What we know is that there is significant change, and we know that AI will affect so many different professions and so many tasks and so many jobs that at the moment are still being carried out. Particularly white-collar jobs is the big change, I think. And as Rose said earlier, I think the pace is likely to accelerate as computer power increases even further and gets even cheaper. So it's big threats and big challenges for policymakers, I think, including, of course, the core issues of cyber and privacy, which are pretty fundamental, but also big opportunities if we develop our future generations correctly, and particularly think about the opportunities for those even perhaps in primary school now. I always think as a country, we rather pride ourselves on sort of coping with and even benefiting positively from paradigm changes. We think we're quite good at it. We're known for our inventors and our innovators and our engineers and our entrepreneurs, our creative talents and our scientists. But we do, I think, on this one have a tendency to be complacent. We know already that employers, large and small, and I've talked to so many of them in recent years actually, they all are looking at the moment for the same thing. They're looking really, and I think Mark talked about some of this, they're still looking for really strong basics. I mean, they absolutely need people to be well educated in a way that we would all understand that to be. But they also want people to have digital confidence. Not necessarily, it's not a fixed capability, it's the confidence to keep going. They want an ability and willingness to challenge and to think creatively. They want team working, they want different types of people, they want openness, and they want curiosity. And yet I would argue our school system is not there at the moment in terms of that. It's weird because there's a sort of collective view of what's needed, and yet our school system isn't being allowed really to be in that place. And I'd argue you've probably got more freedom to do precisely what you've just talked about. So from my point of view, I think we've got a tendency to be too narrow, to be closing down some of the creative options, to be discouraging students from taking maths beyond 16 unless they're doing an A-level, and yet we know mathematical capability for post-16s are important. We are more focused on knowledge acquisition rather than knowledge plus the rest, and I think there's considerably less opportunities for the extracurricular contacts and development that are so important in developing the whole child. Plus, I think there's a dearth, as we all know, of sort of technical and digital capability in an awful lot of our schools, and often the students are well ahead of the adults who are working with them. So what needs to change? I think absolutely we still need to get the basics right. For me, it's about what do we build on? How do we build on what's there, but also extend it? So we still absolutely need a strong, broad curriculum, and we still need strong culture and behaviour. But we also need to look at what needs to change beyond that. We need to look at the breadth of the curriculum and how it's delivered. I would argue that it's time to look at our external exam system and compare ourselves with other successful economies. I think we're too narrow and we're too rigid. Our accountability regimes aren't any longer fit for purpose in terms of measuring the breadth of what we need. I think it's really important to build on and to modernise the strong creative strand we've always had in the UK, and we're becoming less good and less free to do that in a lot of our schools. I think it's interesting, you look at Far East competitors are trying to learn from our history of creativity. They know that they've not had enough of that at the same time as we're kind of driving it out of our system, which is a little depressing. We clearly need to find more ways of developing social capital, people skills, if you like, of all our pupils. And as we all know, that's particularly an issue amongst disadvantaged pupils. Because as well as those higher level skills, for instance, if you look in medicine, the treatment of the tumour is going to be the key issue rather than the measurement of the tumour. So that's always going to require both high-level skills but also EQ about that relationship between the doctor and the patient. But we're also going to have to recognise that we're going to have minds that are open enough that we are committed to reskilling throughout life. And we've never been good at that in Britain. Other countries have been far better at recognising there's a sort of deal needed between government, employers and individuals to commit to reskilling throughout life. And I think we need a real cultural shift in how we do that. And above all, I would argue, we need to be ambitious. not gloomy, but we need to be absolutely relentless for change and demanding of change. And I would say particularly of the government, and this is not a party political point, all governments have got to be smarter and work faster at doing this. We have a tendency to produce great reports and then for not very much to happen. And none of this, in a sense, it may be rocket science in one sense, but actually it's not difficult to work out how the system needs to change. We need practical and sensible initiatives that we can build on. And I think we could do with Mark in the DFE would be my final point.
That's a good idea.
So I finished on time.
Well done. Thanks very much. And let's just please join me in just thanking our speakers. So that's certainly been some stimulating food for thought, hasn't it? And we've got several sort of key dilemmas and questions being raised there, as well as some points of both consensus but also difference as well, I think. There seem to be some messages coming out on this side of the table about building on a core curriculum, but we've also heard about, artificial intelligence being able to learn a knowledge-based curriculum much quicker than humans can, the allusion to an intelligence-based curriculum, and Mark's point that non-cognitive skills will become the premium in the future. Now, I feel that it's probably my role to try to push back and provoke. Of course, that sits very differently from English education policy, as we've heard at the moment. Frankly, there's a clear argument and body of thought that many of these holistic skills that you're referring to not just can't be effectively assessed, but also can't really be taught. I mean, are we really going to be teaching kids empathy, or are these skills and attributes that actually every human picks up through social interaction, and certainly not just at school? Is that going to be the role of schools? So there's a question there, and we've talked about the creativity piece. This is something that England has historically done well at, but do we teach creativity? I put this back to the panel. Any takers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the wonderful finesses is that AI can help us with that assessment piece. Because, AI is everywhere. And data collection is everywhere. From the chip in your shoe that knows exactly where you are, and if you live in China, that means the state knows exactly where you are and what you're doing, to the harvesting of your social media data, to the information from our Fitbits or whatever. Data is everywhere, and we can use AI to analyse, and we can analyse things like resilience. We can analyse things like emotional development. And we can open that up to teachers and learners, and most importantly to learners, to help them understand themselves better, because that's going to be the key skill in the future. Perceived self-efficacy, which means knowing what I know and what I don't know. And that's what I think we need to do in terms of knowledge. I agree that numeracy and literacy are sacrosanct. We have to deliver those things. And including that, we have to have data literacy. That's why Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, the storm around that is because we do not understand enough about data. We are not data literate. They're sacrosanct. Basics of AI, so we know what AI does and doesn't achieve, can and can't do. But then our relationship to knowledge has to shift to one that is more about what knowledge is. How we know that something is true. What is evidence? How do we ask the right questions? Because we've got AI. Oh, what happened at the Battle of Hastings in 1066? Whoop, back again. Who was the King of England in 1098? Like that. What's the point? So it has to be about what is knowledge, what is our relationship to knowledge, and I would call that meta-knowing. So it needs to be, to use a very unpopular word, epistemology. It needs to be that we develop sophisticated personal epistemologies and that we don't expect knowledge to be given to us, because that's naive. And we need people to realise that they construct knowledge. They need to be able to probe the evidence. They need to be able to ask the right questions so that they're not sucked in by fake news and fake evidence. That's the relationship we need to have to knowledge and the knowledge-based curriculum. It needs to be one of probing and meta-knowing.
Thanks, Rose. But Mark, don't we still need to know about the best of what's been thought and said, to quote Matthew Arnold?
Thank you. Just to reflect upon your question about creativity, can we teach creativity? Well, once upon a time, we were supposed to be very creative because other economies and educational systems are now learning from us. So we acquired it. So you can learn creativity. So we've done it in the past. Why can't we do it now? I guess the difference is between that sort of the cultural factors that allow creativity to develop and the incentives that then allow them to be sort of spread, the sort of involution. Was informal, and now we're trying to formalise it, and that's the challenge, and it's much more of a process than an outcome, and trying to measure and recreate culture is much more difficult than some simple sums or some simple literacy test. But in trying to be, so we need to be creative about capturing how you learn creativity, and actually why don't we collaborate, because that's another one of the skills. So I think if you get teachers with psychologists, with HR professionals who use these sort of competency skills and frameworks and personality profiling, academics, I think there's scope for collaboration to work this. It's going to take some while, but to begin the process of finding ways in which we can recreate those conditions which are cultural, they're knowledge-based, they're incentive, whatever they are, all of those conditions in which you can, in fact, learn creativity and empathy.
You see, I think sometimes we have a false dichotomy between this sort of knowledge or non-knowledge, because I think for me, it's more about how do we teach and how do people learn, and do we need to change the way we're teaching, because arguably we've become, pretty didactic, certainly from 11 to 16, in quite a lot of our schools. So I think and then suddenly, age 16, as they go into the sixth form, they're supposed to transform into people who can sit and challenge each other and have amazing conversations, and it's all, suddenly it's all freed up. And I think that's a serious sort of practical problem for a lot of teachers in a lot of our schools, where they are, kids are coming in, and I speak from bitter experience, they're coming in at 11 with a reading age of 8. Well, there's a lot of just catch-up work to do, but how do you, at the same time, make sure that you are developing the learning skills and the personal skills and the social skills that allow them to build fully as human beings? So for me, it's not really about knowledge, it's about how we teach and how we learn.
Yeah, I've got a couple of points on that. I think I agree, actually. The trouble is, we're in an and world, not an or world. So it's not a question of, and actually AI can help us with that, right? So if you're optimistic, so you have to have enough knowledge in your cache, your local cache, to be able to do stuff you do, and then you need to be able to process stuff on the cloud in a way to do something about it. Let's face it, those AirPods you can buy with a chip in it and AI, and they link to the internet. Just think to yourself, is that going to get smaller or bigger? And is it going to go inwards or outwards?
Yeah.
Right? So I will bet, having seen some stuff, I know which way it's going. So the other thing to think about is, I think, in terms of empathy, creativity, flair, self-leadership, accountability, metacognition, these attributes, right? You can't think of these things, I don't believe, in one dimension. There's kind of 3, at least, dimensions to, say, empathy or self-accountability and leadership. One is attitudes, values, and beliefs, i.e. mindset towards it, right? What's your mindset? Do you want to, right? Do you want to show empathy? Well, you might show empathy at home when, with your family, you're deciding to go on holiday and listening to other people's views. If you're in work in a meeting, you might have been trained because of the environment, because you are the alpha character, to ignore everyone else and just make the decision. Now, the second one is wrong, but we been trained to behave in that way. And that is attitudinally, right? That's a mindset issue. And with AI or not, it's just going to probably amplify that worse. The other dimension is probably skill set, which is the kind of knowledge practice element of it, right? So that is do you know how to do it? So active listening, if you think about, draw a hierarchy around that empathy, you can teach active listening if you want to show empathy in those situations. The other thing which is trackable is behavior, which is actions at frequency that you can measure. The great thing is you leave a digital trail everywhere. If you're using Google, right, you might be able to show through measurement and AI that this person started off here, and this is the other point, showing empathy. They had some interventions that got them to think about why it's important, same situation with the family, whatever. You learn some active listening skills, and then 3 weeks later, their data pattern has changed. That's a vector. So you can think of empathy as a vector with 3 dimensions, which is mindset, skill set, and behavior. And if that's changed over time, you have changed that dimension. So you've got 20 attributes, 20 vectors, including self-leadership. You can, and we have, started to measure it.
And
right?
if you open it up and show it to the learner, then they can start learning
Feedback
about
loop.
themselves.
They can see
and
what's
that's
changed.
how they learn to be good learners.
They learn to get learners.
Exactly what they need to be.
Wow. Well, I think as a sociologist, I'm wondering to many of the teachers in the audience, are we going to become socializers rather than educators? There are some really profound sort of conceptual questions arising here, I think. You will be aching to ask your questions, I'm sure. So let's turn to you now. And in our usual way, we'll take a couple of questions at a time and then see which of our colleagues are best placed to answer. So, over to you, hands up. And please start by saying who you are.
They're not very.
We'll have the tumbleweed
Yay.
moment.
Yo.
Okay, we've got a lady here in the white and then a gentleman in front. If you can start by introducing yourselves.
Shall I go first? My name is Valerie Rajagopal. I'm on the Education and Technology course. One of the things you said at the end there, I think sort of throughout it's sort of underlying the need for people to learn how to learn, and maybe that being one of the hard skills that people are taught in schools, explicitly learning how to learn. And I'd be interested in what you think about that.
Thanks very much. So a good question about metacognition and the gentleman at the front.
Hi, my name is Michael. I work for a charity called ESU. We teach kids how to do debating and public speaking. Every teacher I've ever known, and almost everyone I've ever known in the education profession, has broadly agreed with a lot of what you guys have said tonight, and I do too, by the way. Mental health is important, creativity is important. It's not the filling of a pail, it's the lighting of a spark. It's not teaching them what to think, it's teaching them how to think. Given that we all agree on this, and we have for decades, why are we still so bad at doing it? Like, what's holding us back?
Thank you very much. Some good questions there, and I think the last one's interesting in terms of sort of who agrees and who may not. Colleagues, would like to, Guy, perhaps you'd like to talk about the metacognition question?
Yeah, I mean, this is the trouble, right? So if a lot of businesses who can't measure it, it doesn't kind of exist,
Yeah.
right? But then people haven't gone on to say, well, actually, we want to try to. And we want to find out different people's, the way different people approach different problems, because actually one way of doing it might be different to another person's, and that's a good thing. So this all links to diversity as well, right? Metacognition, diversity, self-leadership, accountability. And that is a problem, right? Because if everyone has a different way of thinking, and they're confident around it, well, they're not going to all agree and conform. And I think that's a beautiful thing when people, I like leaning into someone who's got a different opinion to me, but a lot of people do not like that, right? And especially in business, and especially in meetings, we're making decisions and acting and things like that. And I'm not sure we're really taught how to deal with conflict and resolve it. And so you might, and that's systemic. So that is one small bit, but this whole systemic change, all the educators agree with this, but then you have some policymaker, right, judged by populace, wanting to go back to standards and things like that, which makes it very difficult, and they might influence companies. So the other thing is, sometimes with HR leaders, like we did a thing with a big corporation where we asked them to define what the attributes of a future compliance officer would look like. This is with HR. And we gave our 20 attributes. Before, they had no framework to pick from because they kind of went down to, well, basically proxies for which university do you go to, right? Which is the trouble, because that reinforces the existing system. So it doesn't matter what all the educators think about. If over here you've got people using this framework for assessing people, over here there's nothing else to replace it, right? You want something almost like a DBS check, right? Plus Facebook social graph of your work life, including metacognition, where actually you will be fired or deemed negligent if you haven't taken this data into account when you hire someone. If we don't get to that situation, I think it's going to be quite difficult. Now, the fact is we're not far away from that, right, which is good. And then how you think about ethics in that world is a different thing.
Thanks, Guy. Sally, would you answer the point
policymakers,
about...
yeah. I'm going to be a bit less cosy and sort of consensual now, really. I mean, I don't think everybody does agree. Actually, I think everybody agrees in the sense we'd love a situation where all students are broadly well educated in the basics plus, but in a wide curriculum, but also have the opportunity to develop holistically with strong social skills and all the things that we've talked about already on this panel. The reality is, as policymakers, they also have to look and think what proportion of our children aren't at the moment actually getting the basics right. And that's really, the reason for strong push on accountability and league tables and all the things that maybe tip too far, and I've been involved in them and I know how they can tip too far, but they weren't done for bad reasons. They were done actually to drive improvement in the system. And I think it's really important not to forget that it's all very well to have to have a situation where the top, maybe 40% of students are very well educated, and really the schools that they're at can, broadly speaking, be left alone. But we shouldn't ever take our eye off the ball on this one, because certainly if you think back, certainly in London, even as recently as sort of late 1990s, far too many pupils were going to far too many schools that weren't serving them well, and certainly weren't equipping them for the future at all. So I think it's tough being. I think the problem for policymakers is they tend to tip too far over, and there's too much tendency for the whim of a particular minister to become dominant. And I think that's always a problem in the system. And therefore, the more that we can have a level of sort of evidence-based policy making, the better. But I think it would be naive of us collectively to think that somehow we could get rid of a lot of what's there now, and that life would be better for most pupils, because I don't think it would.
Thanks, Sally. I mean, I suppose it's worth remembering the evidence from our own cohort studies here at the IOE show that still in the life course, it's the knowledge-rich curriculum qualifications that have the best remuneration results and so forth. So we clearly need to be seeing a sea change among employers and so forth in the new terrain as well. I've got a Twitter poll result that's been handed to me. The question put to Twitter was, does our education system pay enough attention to developing creativity and innovative thinking? You may not be surprised at the result. The options were possibly too much, yes, the balance is okay, and no. And the responses for possibly too much are 4%. Yes, the balance is okay, 14%. No, our education system doesn't pay enough attention to developing creativity and innovative thinking, 82%. So I think this is supporting your view here. Another round of questions, please. One here. And gentleman on this side. Thanks very much. Please.
Hi, my name is Becerra. So I feel like we've kind of settled on a little bit, at least, on teaching creativity and teaching empathy. However, I was just wondering, how long do you think it would take for AI to also be able to surpass us in this area, and how long until we need to make another similar debate like
Great
today's?
question, thank you. And question?
Nick Causton from Steamco. I'm just a dad, so no tricky questions back to me, please. Fascinated by this and frustrated. A comment at the end there about the whim of a particular minister. I've had 20 years in the creative industries, advertising, marketing, brand strategy, innovation. Came into this world 5-6 years ago and absolutely flabbergasted that creativity is actually a very dirty word in some aspects of creativity, some aspects of education. I mean, you'd be kicked out of Mr. Gibbs' office for mentioning the name of somebody like Sir Ken Robinson, I've been told, reliably. Yet he's one of the most viewed TED talkers, respected and revered in industry, which is where it counts if we're educating young people for jobs. And I question that should be the ultimate goal as we move forward, because we're talking about jobs that haven't been invented yet, but there are going to be very far fewer jobs. We actually need to educate people to live on MBI, probably more to the point. So I think my question to the panel is, why is the word creativity so toxic to so many people in certain places when 83% of the audience value it? And I'm sure you had a bunch of progressives tuned in for that. Research Ed would probably pull up another panel with that result, I'm sure. I'm just baffled. Creative Industries is just about to launch a campaign to convince parents to encourage children into creative industries. No parent's going to want to do that when the newspapers are screaming the 3 R's at them.
Thank
So
you.
just confusion. Sorry, I could go on all night, couldn't I? Sorry.
Thanks very much, that's great. Rose, could you answer the question?
Yes, certainly. And actually, it's an excellent question, and it's a great question for directing exactly what we need to do, because we must focus on the things that AI can't do. Now, there's an enormous philosophical debate as to whether an AI would ever be able to develop empathy. Because in order to develop empathy, you need emotional intelligence. And actually, you probably need a bit of a dose of consciousness. And there's a huge debate about whether AI will ever become conscious. Personally, I don't believe it ever will. Because take that statement I read out at the beginning from the Dartmouth meeting. Then take what Demis from Google DeepMind is saying. We are very prone to oversimplifying what this human intellect is capable of doing. And we forget that it's connected to our physicality and it's connected to our emotions. And these are things that no AI can do at the moment. We have AI that can mimic emotional intelligence and empathy, but it doesn't feel it. And that's where this whole business of understanding ourselves is so important too. Because if I take something like IBM Watson, highly efficient knowledge base. IBM Watson doesn't understand anything, and it doesn't understand itself. So machine learning AI has no understanding of what it knows and what it doesn't know. And the significance of this has only been realized in about the last 18 months, when the big military funder in the US started realizing that if you were going to have artificially intelligent systems making decisions in important situations, they would need to be able to explain why they've made the decision, and of course they can't. They have no understanding of what they're doing. And that is something we can have, because we can develop metacognition, meta-emotional understanding. We can learn to understand ourselves. And this business of learning to learn is so important, and learning about ourselves. The evidence, and I'm sorry, I'm sure many of the educational decisions that have been made with good intentions, but I do not believe that a lot of them have been based on good evidence, because I actually think a lot of policymakers do not understand what evidence really is. And they certainly cherry pick the evidence that they use to make their decisions. So I don't actually think that they may have had good intentions. And we need to really start to challenge those things, because we are capable of understanding ourselves, but we are very inaccurate in our understanding of ourselves. Generally, if you ask, people believe they know a lot more than they do. They do not realise when their beliefs are being shifted. We don't have an accurate knowledge and understanding of ourselves, but we can develop one unlike an AI. So the key to this is that we must develop the things that AI cannot do and probably will never be able to do. And in the process, hey, we will develop our intelligences to a greater extent, so we will become more intelligent. And that's what we have to aim for.
Thanks, Rose. So the point about creativity, I mean, I suppose to be fair, there has been a recent fund launched, right, to support the arts and so forth, which I guess is recognising some of these issues. But Mark, can you?
I get the toxic question. Actually, I would begin just because there's been an outbreak of consensus here today. We can't have that. I'll begin by just challenging the sort of pessimism, because I think we are, as an educational system, outstandingly good in many ways, and part of the debate is to make sure that we continue to reflect and be innovative and develop. And I would evidence that by saying how many people globally want to access UK higher education. How many people are seeking the export of UK education? It's one of the biggest growth areas in the economy at the moment. I think we churn out superb fashion designers, entrepreneurs, and graduates with an intellectual and economic capital that is disproportionate in a positive way to the size of the country. I think we do a number of things very well. There is a sense, though, that we're not moving quick enough. There are pockets where there is a sense in which creativity is toxic. I regard that view as unacceptable and unconscionable, or old-fashioned subjective views. It should be challenged. Why is that prevalent in some places? I think it's the old sort of explanations. It's fear. It's fear of change. It requires retraining on a scale that teachers and a lot of people in the education system have not retrained before. What are they retraining for? We haven't got the toolkit yet. So give them the toolkit, and I'm sure there will be less toxicity associated with that. And also, teachers need to be retrained. They need the toolkit that they believe in, so let them help create it, and they need to be incentivised as well. It's no point innovating if you don't then innovate and have change spread much more widely. Hey. Maths teachers in 20 years have gone from blackboards to smartboards. There's hope yet. We can keep it sort of shifting forward. I do think, however, that policy which places the restrictions and the arbitrary changes of a command and control economy with none of the cash is stifling.
Thanks very much for those. Well, we've had really good engagement from colleagues watching on the live stream, tweeting in. A couple of sort of comments. We have Ji Lee saying we can't use 2 pages of data to measure a human being. AI needs to be built around people. We have a comment from @DigitalGDST saying our approach to AI is to compare this intelligence to human intelligence. What it's really about is an interdisciplinary approach to intelligence. We need computer science, cognitive psychology, linguistics, philosophy. So those are some
There's also
thought-provoking...
a question that's come up on Twitter that's challenged this business about explainable AI, so I ought to give a clarification if that's okay. So Miles, Berry and Tony, hi there. The whole point of the DARPA initiative is to try and see if we can develop explainable AI, but it's not machine learning, because pure machine learning cannot yet explain itself. It uses a whole combination of different types of AI to do that explainability. Now, I know Google DeepMind are working on a whole range of different systems to try and develop those explanations, but it's nevertheless the case that those systems don't really understand in the way that we're capable of understanding. And they certainly can't do that interdisciplinary and kind of emotional and physical and all of that self-knowing to develop that understanding of themselves. So you're right, there is development along the explainable AI, but there's still a long way to go. And then when you start asking those systems to justify themselves, it's complex. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks,
because
Rose.
there is movement and there is development, but it's not easy and we're still quite a long way off. And if I just say this very quickly. If I say the sentence, "Oh, Mum, it's not fair. Jim hit me today, but Miss Hunt didn't see Jim hit me. She only saw me hit Jim, and it's not fair." You all understand that. My 5-year-old grandson understands that. No AI understands that, okay? We just have to remember these things. There's a big difference between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. Sorry.
Thank you. No, good clarification. We've got two questions that I wanted to highlight, just choosing a few of them. We have a question from Miles Berry, talking about, in response to this notion of demystifying AI, but not skewing the curriculum just to coding. He's asking, can you understand AI without some coding? So will that be a kind of baseline within the future curriculum? And then I particularly like this question from Ku Wei Jun, who seems to be channeling my thoughts as well, who's asking, would the era of AI push schooling back to it being a unit of socialization, focusing on non-cognitive skills? I think that would be a key concern for me. So, comments?
It's the coding and AI question. Can you understand AI without some coding? It's a really interesting question because it depends on what you mean by coding. So there was this big initiative called Year of Code. The government got involved and put loads of money. And I ran another campaign at the same time with my money called Web for Everyone. You'll notice the difference in words there. Because my thing was around Web for Everyone, because what I found was working with people that the Year of Code may not have been working with, from communities they might not have thought about, that the word code had a negative impact. And using phrases like coding is just like learning a language, what actually does, if language ain't going to put food on the table, you opt out of it, right? It's not for me. And that's most people, not the few, right? So that's an issue. So I am an engineer. I am not a syntax monkey. I don't care if it's Python or anything. In fact, nowadays, I don't even know what syntax I'm working in. It makes no difference to me. I'm trying to solve a problem, and actually I'm quite creative about it. I have never met a 5-year-old, and I work with primary schools, who is not creative. Something happens to them between their 5, from various classes, which turns them into something else. So.
But do we have evidence, Guy, that people become less creative as they go through schooling?
We don't have evidence, because you're not measuring it, right? So that's the issue. So I think we still do quite well at creativity, though, don't we? On the PISA. I think we do brilliantly on creativity, and I think people it's the same question: is entrepreneurs made, or are they? Of course, they're not made. I mean, everyone's an entrepreneur in their different ways. It's just like finding the thing they match with best. But in terms of coding, if you go, do you need to know how to fit together the Lego bricks to solve a problem which might have various bits of AI in it? The answer is, can you fit Lego bricks together to do a thing? Then if we're talking about engineering Lego bricks together to solve a problem, you need to know how to do Lego, but you don't need to know how to do coding.
Thank you. Thanks, Guy.
I must say, when I was doing the report on digital skills a couple of years ago, I was really worried at the idea that suddenly the next great sort of initiative would be everybody's going to learn coding, because we'd get it wrong. Because it would be fit for, it wouldn't even be fit for now, it would be fit for last year or 4 years ago. And we wouldn't have enough teachers to do it properly, and it would be it'd be clunky. And I think, I think really the key thing that we're talking about is, in addition to teaching, I think still teaching students a pretty broad curriculum, somehow we have to have the space to make sure that we develop them in a wider way. And I'm afraid some of that does come down to time and money. And I think that's what's driving a lot of the problems at the moment, is that in a lot of schools, there isn't the time and there isn't the money to do the extra beyond the core. And that's why, I mean, I know PISA's saying at the moment everything's fine on creativity. I'm not sure it will be in 5 years plus, because it is being driven out of some of our schools at the moment, not because they don't want to do it, but because they haven't got time or money to do it. And I do think that's a problem. That's a problem for us heading forward, and we all need to be pretty on the case on that, I think.
But if we got rid of the
sorry,
exams...
Rose, just sorry, because I want to press back on this. But just turning to the question about socialisation. I mean, the other extreme of this in a thin knowledge curriculum and the sort of teaching purely of skills, which may or may not be able to be fully taught. You know, I've already posited the question: is the best place for this actually a school? Would young people actually learn these skills better in other aspects of the world or the economy? What is the function of our schooling? Any quick thoughts, top of head?
No, I think the argument about are we shifting back into a unit of socialisation? At the moment, schools are the main unit of socialisation for young people. And for as long as that remains the case, then all we have to do is just reassess and adjust the way we teach, what we're teaching, the purpose of co-curricular, and how you might begin to explicitly develop leadership, resilience, empathy, collaboration within a co-curricular framework rather than just the curricular framework. And so, in a sense, this is an adjustment. It's not a paradigm shift. It's an adjustment. And apart from the things we've discussed, I think the key thing is policymakers need to recognise that either through funding or through the accountability framework and the inspection framework. And if those change, then I think we're simply making adjustments within a system that pretty much works at the moment.
Thank you. Did you want to add?
No, I was just going to say that one way of finding more money would be to get rid of the expensive exam system that's not fit for purpose, and then we could spend the money that's spent on the exam system on trying to actually make some more room in the curriculum, because we wouldn't have to stop all that learning to sit all those exams.
This sounds like a different debate.
But we've replaced it with AI, so it is part of this, continuous formative assessment for self-learning and self-assessment.
I see the connection. Thank you. We've probably got time for just one very quick last round of questions. Right. Oh gosh,
look,
now we've got
hands
lots.
now.
I think we probably only have time for two. So, Kate, I'll leave it to you to. Thanks.
Okay.
There's
Fast.
a couple over here. Can you see? Thanks very much. Yeah, we'll do on this side on the right. Sorry, guys, you have to contact people afterwards. So, first of all.
Hi there, my name is James. I'm doing a PhD in neuroscience here. Throughout my time at university, and I think actually it's been touched on slightly today, is that you speak to talented people at university, there's always been a lot of emphasis on achievement and progression in careers, and teaching isn't really highlighted as a desirable career choice to go into. And I think if you want to create this progressive schooling system, there needs to be a way of making teaching more respected and a more desirable career path. I'd just like to hear some opinions on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. More probably a comment than a question, which I think we'd all support, the celebration of the profession. So thank you for that. We had the question over here at the back.
My name's Edgar. I'm from a local school in Hertfordshire, and I wanted to ask Sally, who talked about their Far East countries like China, Singapore, and Japan, looking to our history to learn how to build their education system. Is there anything you would say that we could take from their education system to help us cope with their change in AI?
That's a great question. And I tell you what I really would take. as top of my list is that you haven't got the disparity between men and women involved in STEM. You know, it is a colossal problem in Britain. If we had girls, I mean, there's this tipping point that happens. Look at girls in primary schools. Look at the science club in a primary school. It'll absolutely be equal numbers of boys and girls. And then, you know, go to a typical mixed secondary school, and it starts to fall off. And I know I've always felt incredibly guilty when I'm endlessly doing things on women in STEM. That I badger the same women to come and speak because there's still only 18% of engineers are women or whatever it is. So they are getting that right. They are making it absolutely a career, a future for men and women. And we've got to work out how they're doing it because we are not getting that right.
Thanks, Sally. Anyone else to add?
Although actually, in terms of countries that are ready to cope with the onslaught of AI, actually The Economist published their latest index yesterday, and China wasn't at the top.
No, South Korea's good at it, though, aren't they?
Yeah, Germany, South Korea, and Singapore.
Yeah.
And there were 3 pillars behind that, and one of them was education. Yeah. And a lot of that, if you take Germany, it's because they don't have this disparity between the A-levels and everything else. There's a much more evenly balanced system and a very, very good technical education and wonderful apprenticeships.
Thank you, Rose. So we've got a huge set of questions to probably talk about on our way home tonight, haven't we? Not just about the curriculum, the extent of change that may be coming, the knock-on implications for that, but then the implications for teaching and learning, and indeed so many others here. I think it's been enormously stimulating, and I'm sure that we'll carry on the conversations online. Thanks so much for your great questions and for listening, and thanks again to our panel for a really stimulating set of inputs. Please join me in